It's really important in this work at some point for you to look for a community that you can get connected to so that you can stay motivated and so that you can have a group of people to practice with. And today, after COVID, you can do most things online, and so most of the Zen centers offer a Zoom connection to practice meditation and a Zoom connection to participate in the community and participate in the teaching. So there's a Philadelphia meditation group that has a Wednesday night and a Sunday night talk done by their teachers. And in each case, they have a meditation practice. I'm pretty sure they also have a meditation practice every morning at 7 a.m. on Zoom. So these are opportunities for you to get consistent and to be part of a community. There is a Zen Center in Manhattan in New York City, and I saw a video by the main teacher there who turned out to be a psychoanalyst. You know, he's a psychiatrist, still practicing psychiatry and still doing therapy with people. And he's the primary teacher there now. And he gave a talk, and in his talk, one of the things that he said was that it's often, I'm paraphrasing here, but he said it's often the case that the teaching is that we are not the physical body. And he said, in this particular talk, he said, I want to contradict that and say you are the physical body. I am the physical body. And when I heard that, I thought, well, that's an interesting point to be making to people who have been understanding it the other way. And it's important to understand that in these teachings, there are different levels of teaching. In the beginning, for example, for those of you who have listened to Rupert Spira talk about these teachings, in the beginning, he talks about the fact that the screen and the movie are separate, right? The screen represents awareness, and the movie is what's happening in awareness on the screen, and they're separate. But then further along in the teaching, he says, well, that was at a certain point, that was a useful way to talk about it, because most people's orientation is that they are the physical body, and most people's orientation is that the awareness is something that is a quality they have as a person. And so to start to talk about it in a way where you come to an understanding about the awareness being separate from what's happening is useful. But then later on in the teaching, that changes, and the teaching becomes that the screen and the movie are the same thing. They're not different. Awareness and what's occurring in awareness are the same thing. And then when you listen to what Ramesh Balsekar says about it, you know, when he says that awareness is all there is, consciousness is all there is. In fact, when Balsekar talks about it, he says that whenever you have a question or you're confused, if you go back and consider that awareness is all there is, you may discover your question got answered. You know, by looking at it through that lens, your question got answered. So the idea that you are the physical body is consistent with non-duality, right? Because if non-duality is the truth, then you and the body can't be separate. That would be dualistic, right? So when Nisargadatta said, I am that, his classic book, I Am That, what's the that? The that is everything. That's the that. The that is everything. I am everything. I am the universe, right? I am everything. I am non-dual is what he's saying when he says that, right? I am everything. And it's important to look at these teachings and work with them in relationship to the dualistic experience that we are ordinarily having, you know, to see if I look at what is normally a dualistic experience and I see it with non-dual eyes, how will it be different? How will it be different if I see it with non-dual eyes? So these are part of the kinds of things that go on in the application of the understanding that is the teaching and the application of the practice of relaxing the body and calming the mind to prepare. You could actually talk about that in terms of saying to prepare yourself, to make yourself available to the experience of the truth, relaxing the body and calming the mind. And then working with the teachings, working with the understandings, so that when you're practicing meditation, you're not just doing a technique, but you understand what you're doing. This is so important that you understand that what you're doing, right? So you can actively participate in producing the results of what you're doing by understanding what you're doing. You know, by understanding that you're practicing paying attention so that you can consistently notice. You're practicing paying attention so that you can consistently notice when you're in the experience of duality, when you're in the experience of being a physical body, when you're in the experience of being the personality. You're practicing so you can notice that. And when you notice that, the noticing of that allows you to see it for what it really is. You're not changing it. You're not doing anything with it at all. You're just seeing it as it really is. You're seeing what's called the truth about what's happening instead of living in a belief about it or living in a conditioned state about it. You're actually seeing what the truth is. What the truth is. The truth is happening in real time. The truth is alive. The truth is real. And so through practicing meditation, we're preparing ourselves to be able, in the middle of life, during the times when we're dealing with the consequences and we're dealing with the circumstances of an ordinary human life that involves suffering, right? We're practicing and preparing ourselves and deepen our understanding so that as we experience life happening, we can apply what we understand to what's happening. And by applying what we understand to what's happening, we can start to stop being what we're not. We can start to stop not identifying ourselves with the thought activity and not identifying ourselves with the emotions, not identifying ourselves with the conditioning, being aware of all that, right? Because that will continue to play. And as you get better at paying attention, as you get better at applying these things, the way things will change, if you're applying it, the way things will change is that thinking will become an activity that you have mastery with. Thinking will become an activity that you have mastery with. It will no longer be something that happens to you. It'll be something you're aware of and you're learning how to use, right, in order to be effective in living your life. Well, so what does that mean? It means that this voice in your head that for most people is wild, right? This voice in your head that for most people is wild, meaning that it's just doing its own thing, right? That you start to have a relationship with that voice in your head such that you're paying attention consistently to it, and because you're paying attention consistently to it, you start limiting your involvement with it when it's off the rails. You're aware of it, but you're not identified with it. It may continue to play, but when it's playing and it's running the conditioning, or when it's playing and it's running reactions or irrational thoughts, right? You're not engaged with it, you're not involved with it, and you see it for what it is. You see the truth about it. And because you see the truth about it and you start withdrawing your involvement with it, it starts to die out. It starts to lose the intensity of the thought process and the consistency of the thought process to run conditioned material, right? Starts to lessen, right? Starts to become less activity there, more spaciousness, less activity there. And if there's less activity there and more spaciousness, the spaciousness is awareness. It means you get to experience being aware instead of thinking. You get to experience being aware. And that's a different experience. You get to experience being aware of life instead of being in conflict with life. Being aware of what's happening instead of being in a position in relationship to it where you're trying to control it, trying to avoid it, trying to get more of it, trying to get less of it. that relationship with it starts to die out. And you start to be aware of mental activity in such a way that there's more spaciousness, there's more emptiness there in the mind, and you're learning how to use thinking. You're learning how to be a master with your thought process, meaning that you use thinking to think. You use thinking as a way to do work. You use thinking as a way to process experience, right? Because don't forget, even in the work that we're doing, when you're paying attention to the mental activity, you may think about thinking, right? You may think about thinking, but the thinking you're doing about thinking is using the working mind, because you're working on your conditioning. You're working on unconditioning the conditioning. So you're thinking about how thinking works, right? And you're watching thinking as an activity. And because that's the case, thinking becomes something that you start to have mastery with. You can use thinking to process experience. You can use thinking to learn. You can use thinking to look at what's happening. It's interesting because you could have a thought process that's reactive. You could have a thought process that is the thinking mind. That could be running, right? And while that's running, you can start to think about what's being thought about. You follow that? You can start to think about what's being thought about, but you're using the working mind now, right? You're using the working mind now to deal with the thinking mind. So you're thinking about what's being thought about, and you're seeing that what's being thought about is coming from reactions and conditioning, is irrational, is not useful, right? And so therefore, you're not going to be involved with it, you know? You're not going to be involved with it. You're going to let it play. You're not going to identify with it. You're not going to express it. You're just going to let it play, and you're going to watch it playing. And as you continue to do this, what you're watching playing will start to lose its manifestation, because its manifestation depends on your attention. Its manifestation depends on your attention. So when you start to withdraw your attention, or the way you're looking at it is without involvement but just witnessing it, right? It starts to die out. This is reprogramming your brain. This is changing the mind, right? This is letting the neural patterns dissipate. It's what Michael Singer talks about when he talks about releasing, right? But don't forget, it's very important, and this came up today when I was working with a client, that when you're using the work that Michael Singer talks about in order to be aware of samskaras, be aware of mental impressions, right? To release these conditioned reactions, right? So that they stop running your life, right? When that's the case, in order for it to work, you have had to discern your true nature. This is important. If you don't get this part of it, it's not going to work, because you're going to be a personality trying to do the work, and that doesn't work. So in order for what he's talking about to work, and he does say this, I don't think he emphasizes as much as he should, right? But you have to first discern your true nature. This is so critical. I keep bringing this up because I keep seeing people speak as if they don't know the difference. I keep listening to people talk. When they talk about their experience, they're talking as if they're being the personality, and they don't seem to even recognize that. You know, the last class that we had, remember when you were talking about that upset that you had about the gym, right? And then you chimed in, right? You were both talking as personalities. And
we have no choice then.
If you didn't have a choice, then we're all wasting our time.
But I mean, aren't we always speaking as the person?
No. No, I'm surprised you're asking the question. No, the personality is the conditioning using your mouth. The personality was upset. That's what you said. I was upset. The personality was upset, right? In order for this work to work, you have to make a distinction about that. And the distinction you have to make about that is that I am not that personality. The personality's upset. That material's running, right? In terms of thoughts and emotions and physical sensations. That material's running, right? If I identify with that and I be that, then I will be upset and I'll act upset and I'll be a problem for people. Because it is the case that you have to play the game as a person. The person is the piece on the board. The person is the form you're in, okay? So you're going to speak as that form, right? But where you're coming from can be different. The speaking may be coming from the same mouth. The language may be the same language, but the source of it is different. The source of it is different. And that's not going to be the case until you have clearly distinguished the difference for yourself between the awareness and the personality. So how are you going to notice when upset arises, right? We're talking about practicing noticing when upset arises. Why? Why? Because that's where you lose it. That's where you lose your identity. That's where your identity goes into being the anger. I was angry. The identity goes into being the anger. That's why you're paying attention, so you can notice when that's happening and you can catch it. So when you catch it, the anger is still playing, but I am not angry. I am the awareness of the anger that's playing. And because I'm the awareness of the anger that's playing, it doesn't determine what I say. I can still feel the anger, right? But I'm free to look at the situation and apply wisdom. I can still feel the anger, but I'm free to look at the situation and apply what is workable here. What makes the most sense here? Just to act out the anger? No, that's not the most workable thing. And as I said to you, it may be a matter of your still going and making a complaint, right? But you can do that without being mad. You can do that just by looking at it and deciding that that would be an effective way to deal with the situation. But you're not angry. The anger may be playing with you, but when it's playing, you're applying the Michael Singer approach. You're letting it, you're not identifying with it, and because you don't identify with it, it will dissipate on its own. It will dissipate on its own. But when you identify with it, you're keeping it. You're not letting it go. You're keeping it. This is the heart of the matter. This is the key to all of this stuff that we're doing, all the meditation. This is the key to what we're doing here. And seeing it for what it is and being conscious of it, you may not complain. You may just see it in such a way where you say, okay, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it. It may not be my preference. I may have had a reaction about it, but that doesn't mean I need to do anything about it. Now, you have to understand something about this. I'm not saying that you have control over your emotions. I am saying that you as the awareness can be aware of emotions playing in your system and not identify with it. Therefore, you're not upset. You're not upset. And because you're not upset, you're free to see things more clearly. The anger is not going to distort things. The anger is not going to determine how loud your voice is. The anger is not going to determine whether you're blaming people, you know what I mean, or it gets out of control. And because that's the case, you're going to be easier to deal with. And because you're easier to deal with, if there is any way of satisfying your complaint, it's most likely to happen. Because you're not being hard to deal with about it, right? Well, I'm not saying to dismiss pain, and I'm not saying to dismiss emotions either. I'm saying to be a witness to it instead of suffering with it. See, pain is pain. This is talked about in the spiritual teachings pretty commonly. Physical pain is part of being a human being. It's going to happen. Is it comfortable? No, it's painful, right? But there's a difference between accepting the fact that that's a fact of life that's bound to happen, and when it's happening, you do whatever you can do to deal with it. If you can take pain medication, you take it, right? But you're not suffering the experience of having the pain in terms of saying, why me? This shouldn't be happening. I don't like it. I don't want it. This is terrible. This is awful. Yeah, the resistance to it. The resistance to it, as if it shouldn't be happening. The resistance to anything as if it shouldn't be happening, because one of the things that's part of the teaching is everything that's happening is what's supposed to be happening. So if you're going to learn from wisdom, one of the things you learn is stop resisting what's happening. It's never wrong. It's never what's not supposed to be happening. It's always what's supposed to be happening. And this is how you're going to change the way you're relating to it. You're going to stop relating to it like it's wrong. You're going to stop relating to it like it shouldn't be happening. You're going to start relating to it like it's life happening, and life is always on purpose. Life is always happening the way it's supposed to happen.
Does that mean, like what Brian said, don't resist the pain? Like, don't keep resisting it? Like, don't say, I don't want this pain?
Well, you see, that's like turning it into a strategy. You know, don't resist the pain, right? It may be a matter of, now watch, it may be, if you really understand these teachings, it may be a matter of not resisting your resistance to the pain. Huh? Because your resistance to the pain may be something you have no control over, you know? It's like, you know, what plays it from your conditioning, you don't have any control, that's playing, right? But you can see that for what it is and not identify with it. If you identify with it, then you're resisting, then you're being resistant to it. Then and when you're resisting, when you resist life, right? What's resistance? You're trying to stop it. And when you try and stop it, you're tightening up your muscle, you know, you're tense, right? You're tense. You're not seeing things clearly now because you're being defensive, you know? It's a whole mental state. It's a whole reactive, defensive, aggressive, clinging, aversion reality that is the source of pain, source of suffering, source of suffering. So these teachings will tell us that the pain will be there in life. You'll experience pain in life, right? But you don't have to suffer. You know, you will experience having a human life, living a human life, dealing with the circumstances a human being deals with, having a physical body. The body gets old, the body gets sick, the body dies. You know, that will all happen. We relate to that as if it's not supposed to be happening, don't we? That's ignorant. We relate to the way life happens as if life shouldn't be happening the way life happens. It should happen a different way. And it's never going to be a different way. It's always only going to be the way it is. This is wisdom, the wisdom to see things as they are, the wisdom to understand. Circumstances will present themselves to you, and when they do, the way you relate to the circumstances is going to matter. It's going to matter. Do you relate to the circumstances in anger and frustration? Do you relate to the circumstances in fear? Are you in conflict with the circumstances? Are you struggling with the circumstances? Are you trying to cope with the circumstances, right? And if you're doing any of those things, you're wearing out your body, and none of it's going to work. It's just going to create more suffering. So you have to see, one of the things about these teachings and practices is you have to get crystal clear about the dysfunction and the unworkability that is the ordinary human life. The dysfunction and the unworkability that is the ordinary human life. You have to get clear about that, and you have to understand you've been conditioned that way. You've been conditioned to be dysfunctional. You've been conditioned to resist. You've been conditioned to avoid. You've been conditioned to try and hold on to what you like and get rid of what you don't like. You've been conditioned to do it. And that will run you. It will make you run. It will make you run toward things. It will make you run away from things. It'll make you angry. It'll frustrate you. It'll make you, go through all kinds of changes. Cause sleeplessness. Causes disease in your body. And it perpetuates more suffering. Suffering perpetuates more suffering. Haven't you noticed? Yeah. The more ignorant you behave, the worse it gets. That's what this is all about. This is, that's what these teachings are about. Get your shit together. Don't keep doing it the same way. It's never going to work. It's never going to work. And you're just going to suffer, and you're going to die in terror. You're going to die in terror. And you're going to do what everybody else does. You make the world wrong. You make everybody else wrong, and you make the world wrong. You even make you wrong, don't you? Yeah, you even make you wrong. How crazy can it get? How crazy can it get? If you're making everything wrong, and you're making the world wrong, and you're making you wrong, and you're making your kids wrong, and your wife wrong, and your family wrong, and the president wrong, and the rest of the world wrong, that's obviously insane. That's obviously insane. Well, I can't tell you what to do, but what I'm saying to you is if somebody is in a condition and they haven't done this work and they haven't done the practices, right, then you have to go to them. You can't expect them to show up for you. You have to go and be present with them, and you're the one that knows. You know who they are. They don't know who they are. You know who they are. So you can go there and connect with who they are from who you are. It's the same thing you do with a baby. I've been noticing recently how much I love kids, especially the little ones. When I look at them now, it's like I can't stand it. I just want to grab them. They're so cute. They're so beautiful. They're so innocent, right? And if you go up to a little kid, you know, before their conditioning is too strong, and you make contact with them, they're right there. They're right there. It's hard to stay related to them because they won't turn away. They're not afraid of you. You know, you're the one that's going to, like, oh, am I staring too much, right? But you can't stare too much at a little kid. A little kid's available, right? So that's the same thing that's a little kid, and when somebody gets old and they're losing their memory, right? Or they have a disease that is eradicating their memory, you relate to them the way you do with a little kid. You know, you're not trying to, you don't go to a little kid and say, oh, what are you doing? Do you know who I am? No, all you have to do is look at them. All you have to do is look at them. And when you make a connection with their eyes, you're being with them and they're being with you. That's a direct connection. It's the same thing as we're talking about this as the direct approach, right? What is the direct approach? Instead of processing the circumstances, instead of paying attention to something like the mantra, or paying attention to something like the breath, right, as an intermediary place, right, to stabilize the mind first, right, and then let the energy go back to its source, right? What we're talking about here is the direct way. You go directly from the circumstances back to the source. That's why in the self-inquiry, the question that's being asked is, you know, who's thinking, who's acting, who's feeling? Why? Because the questions are designed to take you back to the source. Kabish? You don't have, that's what I keep saying here. You don't have time. You do not have time. Stop thinking you have time. You've got to get this fast. Anything can happen. You got to get this now. Anything can happen.
That's the truth.
And if you don't get this fast and you don't get this now, and it's possible to get this fast and possible to get this now, and anything does happen, you may find yourself stuck in suffering. And it's not necessary. It's not necessary. You can relax and enjoy your life, no matter what the circumstances are. That's hard to believe, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, it's hard for the personality to accept that, no matter what the circumstances are. And yet the evidence is there. You know, people who are awake, Stephen Hawkins he was paralyzed from the neck down. He was a very happy human being, very fulfilled, satisfied human being. And there are plenty of examples of people like that. You know, some of the great spiritual masters, when they were dying and they had physical pain, right? The physical pain and the fact that they were dying did not determine the experience they were having. When they asked Nisargadatta, are you in pain? He said, there is pain. He didn't say, I'm in pain. He said, there is pain. This is a real possibility. This is not bullshit. This is a real possibility. And the more you do the practices and the more you study the teachings and the more you apply it to your life, the more you'll see how real it is and how true it is and that it does really work. And so I encourage you to stay in this and stay involved with it and get to that point where you see it making a difference. You see the difference it makes. Once you see the difference it makes, then you are home free, because then your motivation is natural. Then your motivation is natural, because when you see you have avoided a major upsetting experience, you know, by paying attention in such a way where you weren't available to suffer, all you have to do is see that happen one time. That's the evidence. You've got the evidence that this works. It works. It really does.